When I left religion and Christianity, I noticed how churches teach its members to advocate for abstinence-only sexual education, which increases STI statistics. Why do Christians teach their members and children not to protect themselves when, at a stroke of a finger, you could find out if abstinence-only education works in the U.S. and abroad? Why do Christians continuously support things that statistically does not work and hasn't worked for 50 years since we started actually having scientific testing? Because I grew up in fundamentalist Christianity, and as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter what science, what the medical field has to say, if it does not line up with beliefs from a specific form of organized religion, the statistics are meaningless to these people. And I'm not saying that every Christian just ignores scientific and medical research, but it's very consistent. If it doesn't adhere or follow a specific belief system, then they reject it as worldly or demonic research. Why is this dangerous? Because if you base how you critically think on the religion that you adhere to, what happens if your religion tells you or implies that you shouldn't seek medical attention, you should pray about it? Well, on the worst side, you have manslaughter charges for parents who they don't mean to do it out of a nefarious, we're going to hurt our kids. They honestly believe that if you believe, you pray, that God will cure. It can cause death, harm, lifelong or short-term harm. When you believe that your beliefs are more valid and should be followed above medical common sense, scientific reasoning, where you'll listen to medical professionals until they tell you something that has scientifically been proven with a lot of data behind it and statistics, but you'll just refuse to follow it if it makes your religious beliefs uncomfortable. Can you imagine living by a book that's 2,000 years old? Can you imagine that? And I know what they believed 2,000 years ago. They believed that putting leeches on people cured blood diseases that didn't exist. They believed that having a witch doctor chant and lift their leg over you would cure you of smallpox. I'm very sure it doesn't. People believed all sorts of things. They believed that epilepsy was a symptom of witchcraft. And I'm going to be very clear. There are a lot of people that who are Christians and don't believe that prayer is the only necessary thing. They believe that God gave doctors and all types of medical professionals the skills, the knowledge, and the talent to aid and assist people. But there's still an underlining current, kind of like a layer of vibe, that anything you learn, if it does not line up with exactly how you believe or what is printed in a book that was written before they understood that the heart, back then they believed heart had feelings. That's why you wear your ring on your fourth finger, because back during the Romans time, they thought that the vein in your fourth finger led to your heart. And of course, nowadays, we know that's utter poppycock. be very careful when you live your life, that you live your life according to safe standards. Don't live it just because it's something you believe. You better make sure that what you believe and how you believe is legal, good for you, and isn't going to hurt you and your kids. A lot of child abusers use the Bible to justify hurting people. It doesn't mean the Bible is bad. I'm saying it's been used, and consistently it will be used for many years to come, to justify all manner of colonialism, murder, assault, all kinds of things. And I always say, if you strip away your religion and look at the situation and what you're saying, does it hold up? If you have a belief, if you remove God out of the belief, your religion, does it sound crazy? Does it sound illegal? Does it sound harmful? And even better, if you put another religion into it, like Buddhist, Hinduism, would you speak out against it if some other religion was doing this? The answer is most likely yes. Because it's like indoctrination. If anyone else, any other group but Christianity was trying to make their beliefs into law, the Christians would lose their freaking minds. But because a Christian's doing it, it's okay. But there's different kinds of Christians. When you teach kids what you believe that is not scientifically or medically proven or backed up with actual data that could harm people, that's when religion becomes destructive. When you grow up in an environment that doesn't teach you about STIs, doesn't give you condoms 15 to 21 years of age, you are flipping a coin to receiving some form of illness. Hopefully it's curable. It's not arming kids to take care of themselves, to protect their health and their future. And there is no statistics that prove that kids are less likely to have sex or do any sexual activity if you give them condoms and have discussions. Actually, it's been proven with many things. If you actually have positive conversation with your kids who are depressed, you just erase 93% of suicide attempts. Just having a simple conversation about gender, orientation, identity, mental health, 93% are less likely to attempt suicide because they have a positive conversation. Same with STIs. If you actually have a positive, fact-based, scientific, and medically proven data that you can share with a minor, they are less likely to get a disease because they're aware of what they could get and how they could get it. And there is no statistics that prove that kids or young adults are any more likely to have sex or be active if they have that talk. And just like parents think it's smart to teach your kids about boundaries, how to safely use a gun, you need to have conversations with your kids on what they're going to be feeling, thinking, and wanting to act out. My parents didn't have a sex talk with me. There was no talk about protection, boundaries, consent, safety. There was no open door. I didn't even know what my parents did until my 20s. And that's because I kind of figured out that's how I got here. When you don't have consistent, positive discussions with minors about sexuality, they can interpret it like I did as something negative, dirty, or preventable. And that's not the kind of attitude you want for kids to have toward intimacy or respect. And there's a lot of kids who grew up in abstinence-only purity cultures. And that doesn't protect kids. Imagine growing up and never being taught the dangers of strangers and the dangers of people you know. That doesn't protect kids. And if you can't have the talk with your own kids, then that's a pretty good clue that you need to either take a class, get educated yourself, or don't have kids. If you can't or won't teach kids how to be the best version of themselves, understanding why and how their body works, you have no business having kids. And if you want to protect your kids, educate them. Get them interested in educating themselves. Because parents can't be there all the time. And kids are going to do things. They may be later, they may be sooner. Keeping your kids away from the opposite sex only works if you're the 80% who is attracted to the opposite sex. And if you don't give kids education, they might find out the wrong way. They might get into a situation where they're not safe, they're being groomed, or they're possibly exposing themselves to disease because you don't have the backbone to have a conversation. And it shouldn't be just a conversation that drops out of nowhere. From birth, you should be teaching kids little by little. So when you get to the right age, which should be before they actually want to do it. And I'm talking about the 99% of people on the planet that really do want to have sex. Because not everyone does, and that's okay. Some are late bloomers, some just never want to, and sometimes it looks different than mainstream society. But for the 99% approximately that does want to have sex now or in the future, you have to teach your kids. Start off young, and by the time, right before they actually get interested, which is anywhere between 10 and 13, they already know how gender works and how orientation works. They know that there are different types of mommies, daddies, and families. And make sure you have an open door policy where if a kid has questions about their sexuality or orientation, they feel safe enough to talk about it. Doesn't mean they will, but at least you have that environment that feels safe and accepting. And I wasn't prepared. I learned a little bit about STIs and waiting till marriage, but it's not the same thing as learning from an experienced, educated teacher. And I've been in sex therapy for 3 years on learning the harmful purity culture, Christian, misogynistic ideology that I was taught as a child. Agency, autonomy, boundaries were never anything that was discussed. Basically, once you got married, you had to be open to anything, especially if you're a woman. Saying no wasn't something that was encouraged, and women were not told to prioritize their own needs. Right there is a toxic dynamic in the making. And what's really sad is that most people out there, they may or may not have been educated properly by people who know what they're talking about. And when only 1 out of 3 men can label women's reproductive organs or have any clue how they work, it's not shameful. It's tragic. We need to teach kids equally that one person or one gender orientation isn't better than another. And it's like groping around in the dark, metaphorically speaking, because it's tragic that kids have to have their first few experiences be bad or uncomfortable. And I mean uncomfortable in a way it shouldn't be uncomfortable. Because if you're actually educated and know how things work and boundaries, autonomy, consent, you will be able to escape or not experience a lot of the things that younger people do. And Christianity does not set up a great, consistent equality in education. Men's sexuality is almost always the center. And if a woman is expected to do what she's told, don't make waves, and that your desires are less important, which is unbiblical. And in my opinion, almost adjacent criminal. teaching people that consent doesn't matter. Regardless of what your relationship status is, consent is the most important thing. Consent and safety. Because if you don't feel safe, it will be really hard, do impossible, to consent correctly. And that's one reason I left Christianity. When you have a power imbalance where 49% of the people in church are men who believe they have divine spiritual authority, you already have a power imbalance. And if women are taught they can't say no, or that it's sinful to say no, I mean, how hard is it for consent to exist in those situations? Very difficult. And the more extreme religious you are, the more lines of consent blur. And it's a parent's duty to teach their kids, to make sure that what they're being told is correct. And if you don't know and you're not capable of teaching your kids, that is normal. It shouldn't be, but it is. Get educated, learn things so you can teach your own kids. I've been doing it for 3 years, and most of the things I was taught are very, very misogynistic. So that's why I went to sex therapy. And it's just sad. It's sad the kind of relationships religion sets up. Not all the time, but it's very mainstream. And if you don't feel safe, you're less likely to say no when you really want to say no.